a lot of people are going to get real mad at this video because they simply don't understand Warhammer. All right, let's break it down. We're talking about psychological warfare on the freaking tabletop. How are you going to psychologically annihilate your opponent, and why it's totally okay to do so. This is a super hilarious meme, by the way, that I did not make. I don't know who did. It was just on the internet, so credit to whoever actually made it. How it feels to read Warhammer novels while listening to lo-fi playlists. I'm pretty sure we have all been there. Let's get on into it. Why are we talking about psychological warfare in the game Warhammer 40,000, which is a tabletop war game? Most of the time, people say psychological warfare, they get a bad taste in their mouth, and they start thinking you're talking about doing gotchas on the table. That's not what we're talking about here. The entire game Warhammer 40,000 is actually based off of psychology. You're always trying to outplay your opponents. You're trying to make them make decisions that will improve your chances of winning the game. We are always trying to trick each other. There is a huge difference between psychologically trying to encourage our opponent to make the wrong decision versus outright being deceitful or lying to them or having bad faith. Those are not the same thing at all. They're two completely different tactics. And today I'm going to teach you how to out-tactic your opponent using psychology. And by the way, most of you already do this all the time. You just don't realize you do it. So I'm going to help you realize you do it. This is actually a funny meme. It's just a perfect example of like what I'm talking about. It says, when the teacher walks by during an exam, looks at your paper and shouts, "Guys, please make sure you read the questions carefully." The little kid goes, does that mean that I messed up? Well, this is something that we can actually do to our opponents on the table. Let's get into it. So what's the difference between psychological warfare and just being straight up deceitful? Psychological warfare, this is where we are giving our opponent accurate, true information, and we're hoping that that will encourage them to make a decision versus over another. Now, this is not the same thing as coercion, although there's a fairly fine line there. A good example of this would be, hey, I moved my models and I asked my opponent, would you like to Overwatch? My opponent knows they have the ability to Overwatch. By me asking them if they want to Overwatch, it's putting it in their head, maybe this is the time I should Overwatch. Every single person you've ever played against will do this. There's nothing tricky, there's nothing bad, there's nothing gotcha-y about this. This is me simply asking my opponent if they would like to use an ability they have. They could very easily say no, but it could be advantageous to me if they say yes, because if they Overwatch the first unit I moved, that means I get to move the next unit for free. So it's a perfect example. There's another example of me conducting psychological warfare by being 100% accurate and truthful and honestly helpful. Hey, by the way, my movement, my Dante unit right here, I will be able to move 19 inches and then charge at +1 in turn 1. So make sure you watch your deployment. When I give this information, my opponent is going to have to deploy differently. And if they don't, they just say, oh, you know, I'm not going to deploy any differently. I'm just going to deploy on the line. Okay, cool. They didn't listen to what I said, and then I'm just going to charge them turn 1 and annihilate them. However, if they do listen to me and they deploy further back off the deployment line, that can really slow their game down and make it hard for them to get in position, screwing them over. So by using these tactics, what we can do is we can be actually friendly, good gamers who are helping our opponents out while also helping ourselves get into good positions. It's literally a win-win to use this psychological warfare. Deceitfulness is completely different, and this is bullshit. And if anyone's doing this on the table, you should call them out on it and report them to TOs, because this is nonsense. This is when dickheads lie to their opponents in an attempt to get an edge. Not the same thing at all. So for example, you ask your opponent how much damage that unit in the corner does, and they'd be like, don't worry about it, dude. It's just like AP1, it's nothing. And then it turns out that it's AP1, but it also ignores cover, and it's sustained, and it's lethal, and they have full rerolls to hit and wound, and it's devastating wounds. That would be your opponent being an asshole and lying to you about what a unit does. That is not psychological warfare. That is being deceitful. Another example of this would be, listen, there's no way I'm going to be able to like move up there and see your unit there. Like a normal move can't take me there. But they conveniently forget to mention that their unit has assault and they auto advance 6. Well, once again, that is a freaking lie, and your opponent is being a jackass, and that is not the spirit of the game at all. That is not psychological warfare. That is being a liar and honestly a dirty freaking garbage opponent. So what we're covering today is we're covering psychological warfare, being a good opponent, but also how do we get inside our opponent's heads. So psychology, but not being a dickhead, basically. So let's go back to that. Do you want to Overwatch? And just as a general rule of thumb, guys, if anyone ever asks you, do you want to Overwatch? Just say no. Like, that's not going to be 100% true every single time. But in all reality, if you ever hear me, if you're ever playing me and I ever look at you, be like, okay, cool, I'm going to move my jump assault intercessors right into the center here. Would you like to Overwatch? If you say yes, it's probably a mistake. And this is actually really just a perfect example right here. So I've got a Forge Fiend right there, and I have Dante with all of his Sanguinary Guard in the lower hand corner, as you can see. Well, I do not want this Forge Fiend to Overwatch Dante's squad because he's got that flat damage 3. He's going to be wounding me on 2s. It's going to go straight through my armor, so I'm going to be stuck on my invulnerable save. He could just pick up my squad in Overwatch, especially if he happens to have access to rerolls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sacrificial unit. I'm just not going to tell my opponent it's a sacrificial unit. I'm going to put my JPI up there, and I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to move in position so I can shoot, throw grenades, and charge into your Forge Fiend, because that's literally what I will do if he doesn't Overwatch me. Then when I ask him if he wants to Overwatch, they might go, I think I will Overwatch and kill this unit. And they kill that unit, which makes me very happy, because now I am free to move out my Sanguinary Guard into position and dominate. There's nothing dirty, there's nothing gotcha-y about this. Your opponent knows that you have that unit there. You're not hiding anything that your unit there. You're not telling them your game plan, but you should never tell your opponent your game plan, unless it's advantageous to you, which I will explain in just a little bit. So there you go. And then just real quick, guys, just so you know, you don't actually have to Overwatch in your movement phase. Like, this is me setting my opponent up here. Say that they're the Chaos and I'm the Blood Angel player here. If I were to move the JPI up there, you don't have to Overwatch them immediately. You can wait to see what else I do. Because if you don't Overwatch them in the movement phase, that means I can't move Dante anywhere really good. Which means then in your charge phase, that's when you get to do the Overwatch. So you're still safe. You don't have to Overwatch in the movement phase. Just a little tip there. So let's talk about threat ranges. World Eaters are the absolute masters of psychologically obliterating their opponents in the deployment stage, if they're being good moral opponents, because we should make sure our opponents have a general idea of what our armies do. So if you're a World Eater player, if you're an Orc player, if you're like me, I'm playing Blood Angels, and I have that crazy turn 1 move with Dante, I tell my opponent, it helps me, but it also helps my opponent. So any good World Eater player who's playing and they know they're playing against an opponent who has never played World Eaters, they realistically might just need to automatically just go, hey, by the way, I have a 6-inch scout move on this Exalted 8-bound squad. They move 9, but I'm going to give them plus 2 inches to move, so they're going to move 11, so it's going to go 17 inches. And then I can give them an auto 6-inch advance, so they can go 23 inches turn 1 and then still charge. That is being a good moral opponent, letting your opponent know what you're actually capable of doing, but it's also getting inside their head, because once again, it's forcing them to account for the fact that you have that crazy movement. Now, most of the time, you won't even use that movement, but just by giving the information to your opponent, you're forcing a response from them. If they're a good opponent, they are going to either set up a screen or they are going to deploy further back, thus limiting their mobility later on in the game. This is an amazing way to give yourself an advantage in the game without being a dickhead. So this is establishing threat ranges. That's awesome. All right, so let's move on into the next step. This is going to be called movement stage or movement phase threats. So this is another thing that I very regularly do in the game. Much like threat ranges, I will very strategically remind my opponent about abilities when I perceive advantages from it. Now, remember, I will always answer any and every question that my opponent ever asks. If they ever ask me a question about an ability, a threat range, anything like that, I am always 100% open. I'm also, honestly, probably going to be much more forthcoming with information than the vast majority of people who you play against. But I will also very strategically remind my opponent again when it gives me a perceived advantage. So, for example, I see my opponent staging their, what do you call these? There are Cursed Cultists with the Dark Commune on this objective, and I really don't necessarily want him to move there. I sometimes will just gently remind him, my opponent, be like, hey, don't forget, I have a rapid ingress with my 10-man JPI squad that I could just come in right behind you and move on it. I'm very willing to do that. That doesn't mean my opponent has to listen to me. My opponent now has the ability to be like, oh, I did forget that you had those JPI there. Maybe I don't do this move. Okay, that's happy. That works for me because now they're not in a position where I don't want them to be. Or maybe they just go, yeah, I accept that. Okay, well, I was hoping that I'd be able to bluff you off. If not, I'm still probably going to do the rapid ingress because it's how I'm going to have to respond anyway, right? So this is an example of revealing your game plan because it's advantageous for you, because sometimes your opponent will back off. There you go. Then lastly, let's talk about baits here. So this is a really, really awesome example of what we're talking about. When you're baiting someone, you're trying to set them up. That's the entire purpose. And so what I will do very often, I'll take a unit like Mephiston, for example, and he's touching the objective, and I'll put him in the far corner. And since he's alone up, you can see this little purple line I have drawn here. You can't shoot him unless you're within 12 inches of him. So now my opponent, let's say they're moving up that Predator Destructor to shoot him. I very well might look at my opponent and say, hey, listen, dude, just so you know, a Predator Destructor probably doesn't kill Mephiston because I'm T5. I have a 2-up armor save. I'm in cover. You know I'm going to Armor of Contempt. And then I also have a freaking 4-up Feel No Pain. So a Predator Destructor, it doesn't kill him. When I offer them that information, they might go, huh, he's right. My Predator Destructor doesn't kill him. And that gives them the opportunity to go ahead and say, all right, fine, I'm going to move the Forge Fiend up to kill him, to shoot him, because the Forge Fiend probably does kill him with the flat AP3 and the dev wounds and all these things. Well, this is good for my opponent because now they're able to achieve their goal, but it's also really, really good for me because now it allows me to charge either my Blade Guard veterans that are in this corner or my Dante squad to be able to charge from behind cover so that my opponent cannot do a Overwatch on me in my next turn, right? So this is a beautiful example. I set my opponent into a position where I'm giving them the knowledge they need to make the correct decisions for them, but it also will allow me to help influence their decision making to give me the best optimal output as well. So this is psychological warfare. It's how everyone plays this game. Everyone does it. Most of us just don't realize we're doing it. Please, please, please recognize there's a huge difference behind trying to outmaneuver your opponent and being a jerk and just straight up lying. Never lie in this game. Never hide anything. If your opponent ever asks you any question, ever asks you any abilities, if they ask you, hey, do you have a way to get uppy downy, or do you have any way to get into this position on the board next turn? Answer them honestly. Be like, actually, yes, I can, because I can actually just auto advance 6 to get there, and since I've blown up, or whatever it is, right? Always work together with your opponent. Now, on the other side, if you see your opponent and they're trying to psychologically manipulate you, how do you react? Dude, do it. You should be doing the exact same thing to them. There's nothing wrong with it with this. This is literally the game. We're trying to outmaneuver each other. Granted, look at them and be like, no, bro, I'm not going to Overwatch there. That is the way to respond. That's the correct way to respond. And then you try to set your opponent up. Guys, psychology is a huge portion of Warhammer 40,000. If you think it's not, well, I got to be honest with you, you're a little bit mistaken. I do think there is a little bit of a problem in our game right now where sometimes people tend to expect you just to play the game for them. No, this is a high-level tactical game. This is a high-level thinking game. I never punish my opponent for any knowledge gaps, but I always punish my opponents for bad decisions. I'm going to give them every bit of knowledge that they can take so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. And if they make a bad decision on board, I'm going to brutally punish them, but I'm never going to hide any information. I'm always going to let them know my capabilities. And that's how I recommend that you do it. Guys, help your opponents grow better. If you fall for a trap, don't get mad that you fell for a trap. Accept that you fell from a trap, learn from it, come back stronger next time. This is the way that we grow. This is the way that we play better. This is how that we really enjoy this very honestly complicated game that we all love. So set the traps, set the baits, follow them out, use psychology to your advantage. And with that, I'm going to be done. I've got another video coming up later today that I think is going to be really interesting that you guys are going to love, because I'm going to be giving a new type of list that most people haven't seen. So with that, I'm going to be out, and I hope all of you have a lovely freaking day. Crump on. Bye-bye.